My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be Ella Montgomery, Video 17, Poem 1. So here is my novel, Ella Montgomery, I Gave You Life, a novel by John Passfield, a photograph of the historical L.M. Montgomery, the novelist, at about 1938. Now, in 1938, with another world war looming and her own personal problems threatening to overwhelm her, acclaimed Canadian author L.M. Montgomery begins to write what she has decided will be her final Anne novel, the final novel with Anne as a character. As she works on the new book, she recalls the days when Anne of Green Gables became a worldwide literary phenomenon and the dilemma that she faced at that time. Whether to write a series of novels in which Anne would perpetually remain the child the world had come to know and love, or to allow Anne to grow to adulthood with all the agonizing torments of the one who had given her life, L.M. Montgomery. So, there are 3 books to keep in mind. My book, L.M. Montgomery, I Gave You Life, in which L.M. Montgomery is a character. In my book, she is writing, I'm holding up the wrong book here. She's writing a new Anne novel, which she has decided will be the final novel in which Anne will appear as a character. This becomes Anne of Ingleside. Now, as she's working on the last Anne novel, the last in which Anne will appear, she thinks back to the days 33 years earlier in 1905 when she was working on the first Anne novel, Anne of Green Gables, and she asks herself now, if I had it to do over again, would I let Anne grow up, having had my own adulthood, which hasn't been very pleasant, to say the least. In her own estimation, she feels she's had a very, very difficult life, Ella Montgomery. Did I do the right thing, then, in making that decision about whether Anne would stay as a child through what turned out to be 8 books, or did I do the wrong thing in having Anne move on into adult life? Now, in simple terms, we think on 2 levels of our minds. Number 1, we think consciously, and number 2, we think subconsciously. During our waking hours, we think on both levels of our minds. When we are asleep, we are not performing actions and thinking thoughts at a conscious level. However, when we wake up in the middle of the night, we become aware consciously that our subconscious minds continue to be quite active during those times when our conscious minds are asleep. Becoming aware of the tail end of a dream allows us to realize that the subconscious mind thinks in imagery. And when imagery is arranged in patterns, as happens when we dream, we have a poem. Since the definition of a poem is simply this: a cluster of images arranged in a pattern of thought. That's a poem, a cluster of images arranged in a pattern of thought. In order to capture the subconscious phenomenon of the human mind thinking in imagery and image patterns, I have included 2 poems in this novel, which presents itself as a 50,000-word thought in the mind of the main character, L.M. Montgomery. So here's what I call Poem 1. Now, I call it that even though there's no headings in the novel. There's no Poem 1 heading in the novel. But I isolate this and call it Poem 1. So let's go to page 5 then for the first installment. Now, there's 16 verses in this poem, 1 in every chapter of thought. And there are 16 chapters of thought in the novel. Okay, page 5, the first one. Praying at the meeting, a cold wind at the door. That's all. That's verse 1. We skip 7 pages and go to page 12 for verse 2. A man weighed far, far down, a beaten soul. Then for the third one, we go to page 20. For poem 1, his dusty robe, his sandals worn, his sunburned face, his wind-blown hair. Then to page 28. I swear was blood came out his eyes, was mixing, with his tears. I'm going to read that again. I ruined that. I swear was blood came out his eyes, was mixing with his tears. From 28, we go to 36. The darkest nights, the coldest days. Then 44. The fading fires, the maddening howls. 52. What I have seen, what I have known. And then 60. What I have done, what done to me. Okay, I have to flip another page here. Here we go. Then to page 68. Let no child follow me. And 76. God's gift to man, man's twisted blight. 86. I cannot tell. I cannot tell. 94. Seal up the path where I have trod. Let no one trace my steps. 104. And I will seal these lips of mine. I shall not talk of dread. 112. Suffice to say, that all will not be well. 120. What I have seen, what I have heard is not for me to say. And the last verse on 127, I'll dwell among, but tell no tales. Ignore that I am here. Well, it would have been easier to print that separately and just read it rather than flipping through pages. But the point is, there's about 10, 12 pages between each item, each verse in that poem, because there's 16 of them, and they're embedded in 16 chapters of thought, and they comment on all the other images in each of those chapters and are commented on in turn. And that's why I find it awkward to flip through pages and read, but that's why I do that when I read images and image arcs from my novels and novellas. I assume it's true for everyone that our subconscious thoughts, our thoughts at the level at which we think in imagery and image patterns, can be divided into two categories of imagery. Number one, there's the imagery which is borrowed and modified from the everyday reality, and number two, there's the imagery which seems to be manufactured from almost nothing in our everyday experience. For the first kind of imagery, I would suggest the example of the family car. This is the car that we drive to work or school every day, with which we are so familiar. The image pattern which our subconscious mind might present to us while we are asleep starts out in a very familiar way. We're driving along the street in a car with which we are so familiar. Gradually, perhaps, the landscape in which we're driving becomes less familiar. Perhaps we don't drive on winding mountain roads in our daily life. But here we are gradually finding ourselves as drivers on the quite extreme switchbacks of a mountain road. And then we might find that the familiar brake pedal, which always slows or stops the car in everyday life, goes right down to the floor and refuses to work. And the familiar steering wheel, which always responds when we turn it by moving the front wheels to left or right, no longer seems to have any connection with the steering mechanism of the car. So this is an image pattern which I would say is derived from our daily life, with modifications, though, to allow the mind to shine a light on the rest of the thoughts which we're having as we sleep. Now, for the second kind of imagery, I would suggest that we see a landscape and even people whom we've never seen in our actual everyday lives, not even in movies which we have seen. I'm sure we all have experienced this. Two of my sons and I saw the movie Napoleon a day or so ago, and we all commented how amazingly well the filmmakers are able to reproduce the costumes and the settings of an historical era, leaving out of camera range today's state-of-the-art filmmaking equipment. However, I think that anyone can say that their subconscious mind is just as imaginative as any filmmaker in creating characters, settings, and inanimate objects, perhaps even monsters, which obey not the rules of everyday reality, but echo the patterns of whatever is disturbing or possibly soothing the mind of the sleeping self. So we have greater imaginations than Hollywood filmmakers. Think of the people or characters, settings which you have created in your dreams. Never seen them in life, not even in a movie. So the poem which I have read is a poem in the mind of the main character of this novel, L.M. Montgomery. Perhaps we readers could ask ourselves whether there are any elements which are drawn from the everyday reality of the main character of this novel, who is a novelist, a mother, a wife, a participant in the life of a small church in small-town Ontario, and which elements are drawn from something other than the everyday reality, are drawn from the hopes and fears of the subconscious L.M. Montgomery as she moves through the everyday reality of writing her new novel, Anne of Ingleside. And then we can ask ourselves, we readers can ask ourselves, just what exactly does this cluster of images, this subconscious poem, have to say about the everyday reality, the present moment reality of the last few days or weeks, or the everyday reality of the entire life of the main character, L.M. Montgomery? So these images match themselves against all of the other images in the novel. They illuminate all the other images. They bring them alive. So once again, this is my novel, L.M. Montgomery, I Gave You Life. It's available on Amazon, where there's more information. My publisher's website is rocksmillspress.com, rocksmillspress.com, where there's more information. On my website, johnpassfield.ca, johnpassfield.ca, there's more information in the form of 2 free books. The planning notebook is that. I plan and write the novel and keep records as I do so, and then I post it on my website. The journal is me polishing the complete rough draft of the novel, a month for sure with every book, sometimes 6 weeks, and just writing as I'm doing so, thoughts about literature, about the particular novel, about life itself. So thoughts on all kinds of topics, all the topics that a novel like this brings to the fore in one's mind. So have a look at any of those websites if you're interested. Lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.